Alrighty, good morning. Rushing into another video update. It always seems like I've got heaps of time when I schedule it, which is like 20 minutes in advance. Then I go, but I want to shower, coffee, and everything else. So anyhow, we are here. We've made it. And today, after I do the sponsor bit in just a moment, I thought we'd do something a little bit different and just literally go through the backlog of Have I Been Pwned stuff, because it'll give you a good idea like where we're going with this, what are the priorities. And normally when I talk about stuff we're trying to do, people pop up and they go, hey, have you thought about this or that or something else? Steph and I were doing some troubleshooting on here 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And there are some good suggestions, good ideas. And it made us go, huh. So what I should actually do before we get to our long Christmas break, which for me is only a few weeks away, 3 weeks away, 4 weeks away, is maybe we'll do that again. And we'll actually schedule that with Stefan, and we'll go through and we'll either do a deeper dive into some of the tech stuff or try and solve some other problems that we inevitably have on a daily basis. We'll talk about some of those today. All right, let's put me on mute so I'm not bugged. G'day, Stephen. Thank you for joining today. Focus. Personal. Do not disturb. 1Password. 1Password. Extended access management. Secure every login for every app on every device. Do I need to intro 1Password? Everyone's got 1Password, right? I hope so. Modern security and IT teams need to make sure every identity, device, and application is secure. Only 1Password registered. Extended Access Management, or XAM, checks every box. Massive thanks for 1Password. They must be I was going to say the longest, I guess, professional relationship I've had. I don't know if that's the right word. It's probably similar with Microsoft. I don't know. But then again, 1Password is a big customer of Have I Been Pwned because we put our services in their things. We'll talk about some of this today when we go through our upcoming backlogs, some things we need to tweak there. And of course, there are consumers of the Pwned Password service. Incidentally, Stefan pumping a bunch of new passwords into Pwned Passwords today, courtesy of, I think it was one of the Minecraft servers, Russian Minecraft servers that I loaded this week that, bless them, had all of their passwords in plain text. So that's going in there now. Actually, how many did Stefan say? So just for those of you watching, let's see, we had 245,000 of them. We updated 69, hang on, something's not right there. New hashes. Okay. New hashes, 245,000. Updated hashes, 695,000. There's 250,000 new passwords that are now going in there into the service. So I checked our stats the other day too. It's still just over 10 billion requests every 30 days. It seems like we had a big jump recently, and now it's kind of stabilized a bit, which is cool. Okay. Who else here in the comments? Marek Wayne, good evening, good morning. Nick's in Scotland. Must be getting cold in Scotland right now. I keep watching the weather, and obviously in somewhere like Norway, given Charlotte's history, and we will be back there next month. I can say that now because it's November. So yes, I can see the weather turning. Daniel James Thomas from New South Wales, Australia. Where's that? That sounds really nice. We're in New South Wales, Thomas. Keeping in mind for the international viewers, I'm only about 30 kilometres from that state, based here on the Gold Coast. Stefan is in France. Very nice. I was in France for New Year's Eve. I saw the start of this year in Paris, which was nice. Okay, let's jump into this backlog. So, as we have now begun to formalize things a little bit more, by having Stefan. I did mention to Stefan we'd be on here, but for Stefan it is the middle. Well, it's not the middle of the night. It's late night. Stefan's in Iceland, so there's that. Now, hey, where do I get to my list? Here's my list. So we track all of this in Slack, and I really wish it was a little bit neater, but it is what it is. As we've begun to formalize things a bit more by having not just me doing everything myself, which was the case for many, many, many years. And then, of course, Charlotte's doing a lot of basically doing everything that she can do, which isn't like highly technical stuff. And then at the other end of the scale, Stefan doing all the stuff that's the most technical stuff, and then I get left somewhere in the middle here, trying to tie it all together and processing all the data breaches. But anyway, as part of trying to formalize things a bit more, I'll put that over there so I can still see the chat. We are now trying to properly track all of our backlog items here. Now, what I probably should do is just filter out all the stuff that is completed. What's in there? Yeah, actually, we have completed a few things there. That's good. Why does that view not just show that already? Filter. Okay, let's go. Not started, in progress, stuck. Whose idea was that? What are we stuck on? Okay, here's Isla. Now, this is in no particular order of priority. I'm going to mix it all up, and that'll allow us to talk about some of the stuff that we're dealing with at the moment in terms of some of our challenges, some of the things we want to do in the future. Now, the number one thing here on the list is challenge coin design and print. Now, it's only number one because maybe this was the last thing that was added. I don't know. But it's a really, really cool idea. And I'm going to show you what a challenge coin is in case you've never seen it. Up here on my, where's my finger? On my shelf behind my desk is a case of challenge coins. It's hard to see it because the camera focuses on me. I'm going to go and pick a couple out just to show you what they look like. So, challenge coins are really trinkets. They're small things of very, very little value, but they're super, super cool. And as you can hear here, they are metal. Now, typically challenge coins are handed out by the likes of law enforcement agencies when they visit each other at different parts of the world. So for us, very often when we've gone and spent time with usually one of the three-letter acronym agencies somewhere, they'll give you one of these coins to say, hey, look, thanks for coming in and spending time. I've often gone into law enforcement agencies and there's like a wall of coins. The Dutch in Rotterdam were very good at this. You go in there and there's just like this wall of all of these cool coins. And there's stuff like, let's start somewhere close to home. Our Australian Federal Police in fact, they gave me this one in Pittsburgh, excuse me, the other day because they had an AFP secondee there, which is cool. It's the Aussie flag with a platypus on the back, and on the front side we've got Australian Federal Police. And very often within a law enforcement agency, they've got lots of different departments that do different things. This other one here is kind of cool. It's a dragon in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, and on the back we've got the FBI logo. So when we're in San Francisco, they gave us one of these. And the last one, now which one's this? This is particularly cool. It looks very American. Department of Justice. So DOJ in the US, nice little like American shield and everything there. But then the back is really cool because it's got like an owl with a whole bunch of like circuitry making up the body. And some Latin, which I obviously cannot understand. So these are just, you get one of these, and of course it's of just about no value whatsoever in a monetary sense, but it's just a cool thing, and it's a little memory of all the places you've been. And there's a real thing just exchanging these, and you can go and get them designed. There are professional challenge coin makers out there. A lot of sort of military history to challenge coins as well. Obviously not not for us, but we'd love to be able to go and visit these organizations and hand one of these over and go, hey, yoink, here's your challenge coin. And I think that'd be really cool. There's a lot of stuff we do that has no practical value whatsoever, but it's just really cool. James says he did really enjoy the more technical stream a couple of weeks ago. Love to see those mixed in. Yep, I'm going to do it today. Okay, James is off. You can catch up later on. Joel's here. Good Joel. Daniel says, that's very cool. I'm from Rotterdam. Excuse me. I'm from Rotterdam and worked with Europol, USS, but ironically never with local law enforcement agencies, so never got to visit. Yeah, that was cool. We went to the wrong place in Rotterdam initially, but then we ended up. They were great. I would arguably say, not sure if you're Dutch there, Daniel. It's not a very Dutch name, but arguably, I think the Dutch are probably one of the best at punching above their weight for the size of the country. They are involved in so many different things, doing really, really good stuff around victim notification as well, which of course is close to my heart. Milford says, pretty cool, Troy. Some things you just can't buy. you're collecting medals. So I've started tuning in mostly for the social life lately. So, I'll give you social life. Don't worry about that. We'll talk about that later. And Ben loved visiting Rotterdam. Should I talk about? There is a thing. Okay. Kids in the car. Don't. I'm not sure if it was Rotterdam or Den Haag. Let me just go incognito. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to put this in the chat. Let me see if they've got a photo here. Yes, this is in Rotterdam. In Rotterdam, for those of you who have been there before, there is a large, very large statue of what is meant to be a Christmas-themed dwarf holding a Christmas tree. It does not look like a Christmas tree. Read the link. That way, if there's kids in the car when you listen to this, it won't be a problem for me. But for some reason, it was just the first thing I thought of when Daniel said Rotterdam. So anyway, now the challenge coin thing. The challenge coin is closely tied into a rebrand. So we're doing a rebrand, which means logo, website, documents, everything. And we need to do this because I didn't think anyone would ever take this project seriously. I literally just typed "have I been pwned," put some SQL injection pattern at the end of it and put a border around it, and that was it. And it lasted well for more than 10 years. But we are now, excuse me, everyone. We are now so far past that we do need to do things a little bit more formally. Now, to me, I think I'm both very technically minded, but then there's this just left brain bit that just likes to have things perfect, like visually perfect. And I'm trying to get us to me, it sort of starts with the logo. If we start with the logo, then everything will go from there. And I've been spending so much time lately looking at all these recognizable brands, thinking about how do we make a logo that looks awesome, that becomes a recognizable brand. And I got to the point of realizing that this is really not my forte. So we had spoken, I want to say about 6 months ago, we'd started speaking to graphic designers. It was a nightmare. We'd spoken to one locally here, and I remember Charlotte and I were sitting here, we're having a video conference with the guy. The guy obviously had no idea what the service was, which is okay. Not everybody knows. There's a couple of people still left. But we're just getting all these questions that just, to me, we're just going down completely the wrong path. You know, I mean, this is not about convincing mum and dad consumers to go and spend money on our service. Like, this is not what the service is. And we're sitting here on a Zoom. I just remember, like, Charlotte sitting next to me, and I've got my mouse just hovering over just the hang up button. So I don't even have the patience for niceties now. Like, this is just so far not the right thing. And then life got in the way and we got very, very busy with other things. And recently I was like, screw it. Why don't I just go, like, literally onto Fiverr? I'll find someone who's done some nice work on Fiverr, and we'll just see if we can do that. You know, we'll just literally go, okay, we'll do a Fiverr job. It is appalling, the quality of stuff we got from Fiverr. Like, I went to someone who had some really nice looking stuff, and I'm looking at these logos going, well, that stuff is really cool. And I was just trying to figure out if I can't just share an image in chat, but what I could do is I could save it into Dropbox and then copy image URL. I wonder if that works for, like, incognito folks who aren't signed into our Slack channel where I shared this. No, that's going to want to log us in. So what I can do is I can just save this into Dropbox and share your Dropbox link, because I just feel that unless you see this, you will not appreciate just how terrible some of this stuff is. I can, there we go, download. All right, so I'm going to drop that in my Dropbox. Where is it? Open file. I can't open file location, containing folder. There we go. You'll find that, like, you download something and you're like, where did that go? So where does it go when I download it from Slack? Into the downloads folder. Yeah, okay, that's probably reasonable. Okay, let me dump this into Dropbox. Trust me, this will be worth the wait. Okay, drop it there. And I'll just drop it somewhere temporary like that. Stephen thinks we should be rebranding to Have I Been Prawned? Now, Marek says you should have asked your community for UX designer leads. I did, and I got there. In fact, there was someone we started going down the path with, and the person looked good up front. It just ended up just not being. I'm trying to choose my words carefully here because there might be someone listeners following me, but it was not what we were looking for. And then I got so much spam from people who were like, "Yeah, I'm a designer. Like, what can we help you with?" I'll tell you what we are doing in a moment, but for now, I just put in the Dropbox links in there. See what you think of that. Leave your comments in the chat. It's just all you've done is just drawn a circle around part of it. It was so painful. And the first thing I thought of was the Homer Simpson car. You remember when Homer Simpson designs a car and it's just atrocious because it's got so much crap on it? That's what it felt like. Now, Wayne's saying you need to build a scene in OBS to show your screen. Yeah, look, I have been thinking about doing that, and the main thing I've been hesitating on is the wrong thing appearing on the screen on a live stream. Unless I sign out of everything first, I don't know. Wayne says, nope, not great. Stephen Jones, almost like a gun. Anyway, what I decided to do is Charlotte has a friend who is a professional designer in Norway who has done some really, really good work and has made as far as I can tell, a good living out of it. So the guy seems to be good. We're going down a path with him where we will be able to iterate on things with someone who is a dedicated professional who knows enough about Have I Been Pwned to be able to get what we're doing. It's someone that Charlotte can communicate really easily with then as well, because I don't need to keep going round and round on this. And they will be able to do the logo, the website redesign, other branding stuff, and we'll pay money. And we have revenue, we can do that. But I think that's just the way we have to do it. Everything else was just, as Joel says, what even is that? Right, so I will pay money to save my sanity. I'm not getting shit like that anymore. When I say money, it's like it's at the moment it's looking like single-digit thousands, so it's not too bad. So anyway, that will then also flow through into the challenge coin. The thinking with the challenge coin, I know, geez, so far I'm going 17 minutes from the first backlog item. The thing with the challenge coin is a little bit like this AFP one, where we have a bit of Australiana on one side. I really like the boxing kangaroo symbology as a fighting cybercrime sort of thing, and then whatever logo we come up with on the other side, there'll probably be a little bit of iconography around the cybersecurity scene without being like padlocks and kitschy stuff. One of the FBI challenge coins, not one here but one in my cabinet that Stefan has as well, has got binary on the outside, and Stefan decoded the binary, and the FBI challenge coin, the binary on it translates to underpaid. Which I thought was, I'm telling you, there are people in the FBI that have the wildest sense of humor, and are just really cool people. So anyway, so it might be something like that. The second item on our backlog actually relates to this, and it's merch design and print. So we do intend to do some merch. Again, there is absolutely no financial value to us whatsoever in this. Charlotte just really, really wants to do T-shirts and hoodies and stuff like that. So when we have a solid logo that we're happy to start investing in, and a branding design, what's the right word? Branding template, branding guide, we can start using that on all sorts of things. Now, some of the things we put in here for merch design, what's in this item here? How do I open that? Add field. Do we not have a description here? No, I didn't put a description in. But we'd had ideas around, everything from the obvious T-shirts and hoodies and stuff like that, stickers. So I'm sure there are a lot of more data breach-centric things that can be more fun. It's been N number of days since our last data breach, or since our last part. I don't know. We'll come up with stuff. Next one here, refine app insights, error reporting. One of the things that Steph and I have been working a lot on at the moment is just around the visibility of what's going on in the system. I'm saying this is a macro topic. This will tie into something else later on as well. There's an item down the bottom here, public service status page. Now, this would be really useful for many reasons. At the moment, we're using application insights, which is part of Azure. It's built into the platform. It's okay. I get alerts every now and then if there's been a spike in errors because the database has scaled, for example, and dropped some connections, which we're improving on these things too, by the way. We had a case recently where, as we are starting to, and I won't get into the technical weeds of this because we've spoken about many other times, but as we're starting to move away from every query of an email address going through to the origin and actually starting to query the Cloudflare edge, what happens when we go and load a new data breach is that all the cache at Cloudflare gets flushed out, our cache hit ratio goes down to 0, and it takes about 24 hours to get to 50%, and then a long time after that it starts to tail off and we effectively start to get nothing through to the have I been pwned origin. In fact, I've got a chart here. Let me put that at 24 hours. So for things like one of our enterprise endpoints just here, we'll talk more about the enterprise stuff a little bit later as well. So I flushed that cache around about 24 hours ago when I last loaded a data breach, and we got to 50-50 cache hit ratio at about 8 hours ago. So in fact, that took 16 hours. Now, of course, this depends on the volume of requests and whether or not they're requesting email addresses that fit into hash ranges that have already been requested before. Again, won't get into all the technical stuff. But surfacing that information is really important. We've been doing a lot of stuff around, again, I've mentioned moving from table storage to SQL Server. Incidentally, now we have no more dependencies on Azure table storage. And probably today, I'm actually going to delete the table storage instance that had been there since literally day one and served however many billions and billions of requests for email address searches. So that dies today, which is a big moment. So everything's hitting SQL Server now. So we're continuously optimizing SQL Server. And when you get to, it's not really 14 billion records, it's more like 6 billion email addresses and then 14 billion, well, it is 14 billion entries mapping an email address to a particular data breach. But when you get to that scale, optimizing down to very, very, very small units, milliseconds or less, is really important, because when we flush a data breach and suddenly all the requests start going through to the origin website, and let's say we've reached this 50% parity point after 16 hours. So suddenly the traffic literally doubles in an instant. Well, let's say we get to the point where we've got 95% of requests going to a Cloudflare edge node and being served from there, and then suddenly everything goes to the origin. Now we're 20xing the traffic pretty much instantaneously. So how do we have a database that's large enough to be able to scale and do that quickly, but not so much that it costs us too much money? And a big part of that is the more efficient we can make all of the queries, then the less overhead we need when suddenly we get a big load of traffic. So visibility to all that sort of stuff. Even visibility for things like what is the actual observable latency from clients in different parts of the world. Now, this was something that came up recently where one of our subscribers was saying, look, that the latency has increased quite a bit. What's going on? And there are a number of different factors involved there. So obviously their distance from a Cloudflare edge node, if it's being served from cache, their distance then between that edge node and the origin service in the West US, if we have to go to origin. Are they using HTTP2? Are they using TLS 1.3? Are they using gzip versus Brotli versus, what's the new one that Cloudflare's just done? I forget it. Anyway, different ways of actually making those connections. So being able to see the observable latency from different parts of the world is really important. And we've actually been playing around with Grafana recently, where that's shown us that particularly in places like South Africa, they've got a Cape Town, I think they call them probes there. The latency is obviously fundamentally different to, I think the closest to the West US data centers in Oregon. Now that's a major thing, but also that is a really, really good illustration of when we serve stuff from cache at Cloudflare, what a massive difference that makes the further you get away from the origin. So refining error reporting, visibility to performance is a really, really big thing for us at the moment. Create a dummy domain anyone can use for testing. So people want to be able to do domain searches and see what it's going to look like In terms of API responses, we have a dummy domain. We've just literally got to allow anyone to add that to their account. That seems like an easy win. I should just do that. Consolidate domain and API key dashboard. So at the moment for folks who take out a subscription, so this is inevitably enterprises either querying larger domains or wanting to use the API. There's like a domain search dashboard and an API key dashboard. It's messy. I don't like having the two things. There are legacy reasons. We want to roll it all up together and possibly look at doing the auth differently at the moment as well. So at the moment, if you go to like domain search, it's enter your email address, we'll send you an email, you'll get a magic link and you'll come back. And it saves us from holding credentials and all sorts of other things. But it's messy and it has problems like one of the things we constantly get tickets over is someone will say, I bought a Have I Been Pwned subscription and I've just gone and accessed my dashboard and it says I don't have one. Well, you're using the wrong email address, mate. It's like you have multiple email addresses. You bought it under this one, you're logging on with this one, and now you're wondering why you can't see stuff. Now that I say that out loud, we can only take people so far, right? Like there's a point at which you just, like I don't want to say people are stupid, they're innocent mistakes a lot of the time. But trying to find ways to streamline that process and reduce our ticket volume. The number of subscribers we have obviously keeps going up. We're trying to scale the service without having to scale the overhead of running it. There's something else in the list a little bit later on that will really, really do that. Ability to suspend an enterprise subscriber service when payment is overdue. Now, let me give them a high horse about customers and the problem there. So, when people come and get one of the public services that we offer, so they go to the website, there's a Stripe payment, they put the credit card in, it might be $3.95 for argument's sake. As soon as that clears, then they get their API key and they can go and they can make API requests or search their large domains. And there's just an absolute beauty in that model, which is no pay, no play, right? Like you've got to actually pay for the product. Now, of course, many organizations don't like doing that. And I've spoken before about the dramas we have with that public API and the fact that that then leads us to having to use resellers and so on. Separately to this, we do have an enterprise channel, which there's separate endpoints, there's separate services that's used by the likes of 1Password and Mozilla for their Firefox monitor, among a small number of others, certainly small compared to the public ones. They have custom contracts, lots of overheads, minimum 12-month term, fundamentally different pricing, all the rest of it. And they get invoicing. Now, what inevitably happens is you sign a contract mutually. That's how contracts usually work. And you have payment terms. And our payment terms are usually, I think, 28 days. Sometimes it's negotiated to a bit differently. But let's say it's 28 days, which means that, let's say for argument's sake, on the first of the month, you get an invoice issued. The invoice is due within 28 days. Now, it's payment in arrears. Like your service begins immediately with these enterprise customers. You now have 28 days to pay. Very often, you get to 28 days and there's no payment. So our accounting system sends a reminder. Another 7 days, still no payment. Reminder. Another 7 days, still no payment. And instantly, when there is payment, Charlotte then has to manually reconcile it in Xero. So we use Xero for our payment processing. Not our payment processing, but our accounting. So this is for enterprise customers, it's EFT payments. They're paying into a bank account. So she has to go and manually reconcile. What happens when they start getting more and more and more overdue? Well, usually she ends up sending an email, "Hi, your account is very overdue." And when I say more and more and more overdue, we've had cases where customers are like 90 days overdue, 120 days overdue, and then it's multiple invoices as well. So we're paying for all of the infrastructure and services in order to support their queries, and they're sitting on the money. On very, very rare occasions, we'll get to the point where we'll say either you pay by this date or your service stops working. And on very, very rare occasions, we stop the service. I honestly, I can think of only once or twice. I would like to hook into Xero, and I'm sure Xero has APIs for this, and just automate all that. And, you know, maybe we even case by case it, but it could be a situation where it's like, okay, you are now overdue. You have 7 days from now, and then your service will stop working. You have 3 days from now. Are you really, really sure you want your service to stop working? What's fascinating, talking to organizations about this, and we've got obviously customers all over the world, you'll get people say, because of legal requirements in insert country name here, we can only do it this way, or we must have this, or we must have that, or we can't pay you until such and such a date. Now, they know all this before they sign the agreement. But it's excuse after excuse after excuse. And what's fascinating is when enough pressure is applied, suddenly that stuff goes away. Right? So there's lots of bullshit reasons when there is not sufficient motivation. So this is about creating sufficient motivation. The next one here is going to save Charlotte a lot of headache. Create self-service quote and invoice system. So for our public service, the one people pay for with credit cards, we get lots of instances where people say, we must have a quote before we pay. Excuse me. And I've spoken about this before. I wrote a big blog post about how painful this is. But there are amazing APIs into Stripe. This can all be automated. We just need to sit down and write self-service portals for a combination of organizations and resellers. So by doing this, we'll be able to save the manual work that Charlotte currently does, where she has to go into Stripe, manually raise a quote or an invoice, and then send it over to the customer. It's a lot of mucking around. I have created a little .NET console app that she's been running locally that does all of that for her. So it saves her going into the Stripe dashboard and doing all that. And all it does is just hooks into Stripe APIs. And the thinking there is that at least if we can get all the business rules and things right, and there are a few little odd things, like one of the things we learned recently is that in Stripe, let's say we've got a customer who says, could you please, we're a brand new customer, we need an invoice before we can pay for the service. Could you please create an invoice for us? So we go into Stripe, we create the invoice, we choose the product, you set the payment method to effectively collecting payment from the customers. We don't already have a card on file. So collect payment from the customers, and then you send the customer the invoice and a payment link. And then they go to Stripe, and then they enter their credit card data into Stripe, and they pay. Now, we thought that was good and everything would be fine. And what we didn't know is that account remains in effectively collect payment from the customer. It doesn't change to automatically charge the card. So we had one recently where they're on just a monthly subscription, and it got to 1 month later and their service stopped working. Their key got deleted because payment wasn't made, because they didn't know that they had to go back into the portal, and we didn't know they had to go back in the portal. Anywho, the point is, by creating this little console app, we can go through and do things like when we create the invoice, we can then go through and programmatically set it to automatically charge the card on file. So, and it's very, very easy to do this just running a little local console app. So we've created the template for how this will work. And now we've actually got to build the web UI for it. So anyway, that'll be there on the list. Let me have a look at some of the comments here. Marek says, AI chatbot for common subscription queries. Ugh. Well, my view is that I think with Have I Been Pwned in general for the last, we're going to be 11 years about a month from now. 1 month and 2 days from now will be 11 years. Let's call it 11 years. So my view with Have I Been Pwned for the last 11 years, it's almost like gamifying how big can it get with how little overhead. I like that idea. I really, really like that idea. And I think this is such a unique service. And also it has become a business as well. It's such a unique business. So when you look at so many other people around you that work for themselves and you look at their overheads compared to their revenue. So if we look at something like, what's a good example? A carpenter, like if you're a carpenter, you've got to have tools, you've got to have your truck, you've got to have all your insurances, you've got to have all the materials that you take to the building site. You have a huge amount of overhead to produce the thing that you produce. And I think in the tech industry, it is so cool how much you can do with so little. And for that last 11 years, it's been a bit of a game to go like, how tightly can we squeeze the overheads on us while still making the thing bigger and bigger. Pwn Password is a great example. More than 10 billion queries a month, and we just turn on the Cloudflare bits, and it's fine. So for things like, chatbots and whatever else, what we're trying to do is make it intuitive enough that people don't have to ask questions. If they do, then the knowledge base has got enough information in it. And we want to get to the point where the stuff coming through in the ticketing system is just the absolute edge case bizarro stuff. That's what I really want to do. I want to keep doing more of that. Joel says that level of non-payment is just taking the piss. But I'm thinking of one in particular, and I obviously won't name the company, but I also won't name the part of the world that they're in. But let's just say it's probably not where most of us are from. And I think culturally there's a little bit of a difference there as well. But it was almost the obnoxiousness of this is just how it works in our country of residence. We're like, mate, you signed an agreement. We're providing services. You're now I think in this case it was even like 4 months overdue. Without me naming who it is, one of the cool things in Xero is you can actually see the average, how long it takes them to pay on average. So I'll tell you what it is for this particular customer. Now, of course, one way of mitigating this problem that we've started to put to people is like, look, if you're having trouble paying your bill on time, why don't you just pay quarterly or 6 monthly or even annually? Just reduce the number of times we have to do this stupid dance where you're making excuses about not being able to pay your bills. What happens if you don't pay your electricity at home? Does the electricity company go, well, we understand that you think that 30 days, for example, doesn't mean 30 days. So yeah, we'll just give you longer. Please keep using our service whilst you figure out when you ever actually want to pay. All right, so this particular organization that is on 28-day terms, suspense while it loads. I know that they're, now keep in mind this will be an app, come on Xero. They pay in 54 days. So this is the average number of days between when invoices are issued and when they're paid. And it's just nuts. If I go back to some of that was the issue date, paid date. If I look at the gap between some of these issue date and paid date, I think we had a lot of trouble with this particular one earlier this year. Here we go. Like one of these invoices issued on the 19th of July, paid on the 19th of December. August, September, October, November, December, 5 months. Issued on the 19th of June, paid on the 21st of November. Issued on the 19th of May, paid on the 17th of October. Issued on the 19th of April, paid on the 14th of August. So this is, to your point, Joel, literally just taking the piss. Now, interestingly, I'm looking at it now. Issued on the 25th of July this year, paid on the 6th of August. That's good. Issued on the 21st of March, paid on the 24th of April. All right, a few days overdue. It is fascinating. Like once there is a risk of actually losing something and no longer can you screw people over, this is like it changes attitudes. It's great. Love this. Other comments in here. Ben, yes, ZSTD is the encryption algorithm that Cloudflare is now supporting from their edge, which I think from memory was very similar to Brotli, but was like a lot faster or something to that effect. Anyway, the point is going back to that original discussion, consumers of the service have a lot of impact on how fast it is, particularly when higher levels of latency are involved. What else is in here? Juan is in New York. G'day, Juan. Daniel, I don't know if you're talking about the same country, but we've been considering just geo-blocking a certain country. Incessant requests for discounts too. It's easy to respond to requests for discounts. No. Like that's literally it. No. It's we never started this service in order to and actually I'll qualify this. We do discounts for nonprofits, we do discounts for education, but when some rando pops up, or particularly when a reseller pops up and they're like, what's the reseller price? Well, You go to haveibeenpwned.com and you click on the page that lists the prices. Yeah, but what price do you give us? Well, it's the one on the page. Well, what do we charge our customers? Well, whatever you want. You're a reseller, mate. That's how it works. I know that if ever someone that actually built businesses and was business minded rather than technically minded, I know if anyone ever came and looked at this, they'd go, you are doing all of this so wrong from a financial perspective. I know. And they'd look at it and go, you know how much money you could make out of this if you only did all of these other things differently, but it would just sap my soul. It really would. As Thomas says, just switch it off and it will solve itself. Yep, that does work very, very well. Marek, it would be fantastic if Stripe allowed charging late fees on overdue invoices. So in our standard contract, which was written up by lawyers, that's one of the things that's in there. We can charge late fees, and it's capped. I think it's like 5% per month or something like that. But we can do that. I don't think we have ever actually done that, but we do reserve that right. Given that we're not providing a physical product and it's a digital product and we can turn that product off at any time, I'm more inclined to do that, because I would imagine that charging late fees would then create so many other problems internally, particularly if they've already had POs raised and values sort of approved. Turning it off gets attention. Rob says, send 402 responses, payment required. Is that a legit response? HTTP 402, I've never really thought about that. HTTP 402, payment required. Yeah, how about that? Just standard response code. I don't know if I should be using that. This is why I like doing these sessions. Now, mind you, at the moment, let's say it's a public API key. If it expires, you get 401, unauthorized. And then it's like, why am I getting... yeah, because my key's dead. I'm going to leave that open there. I can think more about that. All right, so creating self-service invoice systems. What else is on here? Just a little thing here. Someone said the other day, he said, you really, when someone tries to make a post to an endpoint that only supports GET, for example, you really should just be returning HTTP 405, which is an unsupported method. It's like, oh, yeah, we're not actually doing that at the moment. Now, that arguably won't make the service any better. It won't make it any faster, or it won't do anything else of much value, but it just seems like the right thing to do. What else is here? Some of these won't make much sense without a lot more context. Add subscription page under API header. I made that. What does that mean? What was I thinking then? Open. Need to add this so people can manage and find their subscriptions easier. Under API header, what does that mean? Oh, okay. So I think when you go to API in the nav, you need to just have a link to subscription. I'm really conscious, in part because of all the legacy of this service, being a free community project at its origin, and now having things like subscriptions, it's actually hard to find information. And we live and breathe it every day. So for me, a lot of this is obvious, but we'll get tickets and people say, what do you actually get for the service? You know, if you go and buy something on Stripe. So, it's actually a good question. I don't think we do a very good job of explaining that. So it's stuff like that we need to make a lot clearer. Stephen says, that's funny. I was looking at 402 today as I was wondering what it would be. There you go. We've got a few little mechanical things here around busting cache. Cache is wonderful and amazing and frustrating. It really is. And one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment is, as far as reading data from breaches, when we load a breach, there's really nothing that changes with that data until we load the next breach, with one exception. And the one exception is people who opt out. So imagine the state of Have I Been Pwned as it exists right now. It will not change any of the records of people in data breaches until I load the next breach, unless if someone says I want to opt out. And then we have to obviously remove their data from the origin, but then we also have to figure out where their data exists in cached points as well. When we do that breach load, we need to get all the new data loaded, get it all ready, and then flush not just everything out of Cloudflare, but we also have some in-memory caching as well in our functions. So things like the list of data breaches is cached in memory in an Azure function. And just yesterday, I changed that cache expiration from 10 minutes down to 5 minutes because what was happening is I'd load a data breach and we've got a cache flush button, which then calls an API to Cloudflare and flushes everything out. But we can't forcibly evict cache from in-memory in functions when those functions run many instances. They just scale out, they're serverless, run on servers. We can't force that to happen. We have to either restart the service, which we don't want to do, or we have to wait until that cache eviction period runs or finishes. And until that finishes, it won't load the new list of data breaches. It won't know that a data breach has now gone live because we put a record in the database well before we make it live. Record goes in the database, then we start loading all the data. I write the description, get the logo and everything. Eventually make it live. So timing all the caching stuff is really important so that it's fast, but also accurate. Getting that trade-off with cache is always interesting. Joel says, I've always found looking at returning the technically, semantically, morally correct HTTP code is great for helping objectively evaluate your APIs. I agree. I think it can get a little bit religious at times. The Rastafarians, as they call them, get very upset. I wrote a blog post once about your API versioning is wrong, so I've done it 3 wrong ways. And this was when, I'd do it differently now, but this was when we had people arguing about how you should properly version your APIs. But arguing about things like response codes, there's a lot of argument about if you search for an email address and you find it, okay, well, that's going to be HTTP 200. If you don't find it, is 404 actually the correct response code? Well, arguably it is because an entity was not found. So you've searched for an entity, the entity is not there, not found as the right response code. But some people interpret that as there is no service running at that endpoint. And we've had many tickets over the years where people are like, your documentation is wrong, there's no service there. No, it's right, there's no entity there. So I'm just a little bit cautious of that. And equally, things like the semantically correct verb. When should it be a put versus a post? We have lots of documentation on that, don't get me wrong. But things like a get, people say, well, a get shouldn't change state. Well, maybe not necessarily, because what happens if a get raises a logging action, and that logging action is a change in state that might trigger other things as well? So I feel like you can't be too semantically strict on all these things, as much as we should try where possible to use industry's established standards for things like verbs and response codes. Milford says, I used to wonder why there's no government funding or government I get challenge coins. Something was government service equal to HIBP. With all this InfoSec funding and all, I do wonder just what it is they're up to there. I'll give you a multi-pronged answer to that. First of all, when you say there's no government service equal to HIBP, which government? This is always often people have said, maybe HIBP should be handed over to the government to run. Which one? You probably mean yours, but the Chinese are really good at tech stuff. Do you mean? No, you don't mean that one, do you? I don't think it ever should be a government. I think Charlotte often says people look at it as a little bit like the United Nations of data breach stuff. It shouldn't be attached to any one part of the world. I'm quite adamant about that. I want to sort of reflect the Aussie origins. I like that, but not be an Australian service or a US service or anything like that. So that's the first bit. That the funding thing is very interesting because we're sitting here talking about things like paying everything from graphic designers to Stefan to increasingly paying more for the services we run on. And we can do that now because we now have revenue. And we didn't have that when it first started. But we managed to take enough shortcuts and do clever things to make it very, very cheap. So, now we have the funding. We don't need the government funding to run this. In fact, we give the government stuff for free. We've got 36 governments on this service getting free access to all their domains. So I think that's a much better position to be in. And when you talk about all the cybersecurity funding and all for governments, one of the really fascinating observations that Charlotte and I have made as we've visited lots of governments and lots of law enforcement agencies around the world is how underfunded that they are. And you can see it just by walking around the offices. It is, apologies for anyone in government listening to this, but so often those offices are like corporate shoebox hell. They're very often the InfoSec stuff as well is like buried in the bottom of the basement, so there's no windows and stuff into it. It's the most bland, boring offices you can imagine, with the exception being that they normally have nice computers and nice monitors. And then you go into somewhere, like a private company, or not sorry, private company, a public company, but a commercial entity. So, for example, we're in the US. We went through the FBI, or we went to CISA in DC, the FBI in Pittsburgh, and then we saw CCCS, the Canadian Cybersecurity Centre, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Ottawa, and then we were in San Francisco and saw the FBI again and CISA again. And then we went into Stripe. And walking into Stripe's offices is like, well, I guess this is what a $70 billion company could do. That's what they're valued at. Apparently $70 billion US dollars. And you walk in there and you're just like, this place is amazing. And that's the difference between the access to resources that governments have versus private enterprise. It is fundamentally different. I know it's a very popular thing to say that governments aren't spending our money very well, or that they've got too much, but I really don't think it's that. Joel says you can get very fruity with the Azure Functions runtime to do funky background stuff that could help with cache evictions. Right, I was actually just thinking, can I just drop it down to 1 minute? What happens if I do that? It just means that every 1 minute there's going to be a SQL query that then repopulates the cache locally. Do I care about that? We'll give it more thought. It's one of those things where no one's really complained yet. And it's more just me going, why isn't this thing flushed yet? Trady Trivs here, good morning. Stephen, Get really shouldn't change anything, logs but included. Think about it as a bot crawled over that URL. But you can expand that to the point where if a get is really semantically there to retrieve an entity, what happens if some sort of action needs to happen when the entity is retrieved? You have a service where it's awaiting invoice collection. Once the invoice is collected, then the service needs to be flagged as invoice having been collected. All you're doing is getting the invoice, but in the background, something else. You get what I mean? I don't think we're going to get too carried away from it. Joel thinks, talking about Russia trying to get 20, whatever that figure is for the zero. So this is where Russia decided to start fining. I think it was YouTube, wasn't it, for banning a bunch of stuff. And every day the fine doubled. And now they're up to a number which is greater than all of the number of grains of sand in the world. So, of course, they're never going to get that money. It's a bit weird. Milford says, I was referring to funding, not who should run the service. I'm in Perth. I'm referring to the federal government. Since this issue affects most Oz, Defence has a huge budget, and you've taken the initiative. That they do have a huge budget, but when you spend time in places like ASD and you see, you don't see Stripe levels of excess. They are constrained, and there are things that they can spend money on, obviously, but they are very constrained, much more so than private enterprise. Even to the point where the people working there are earning a fraction of what they would in private enterprise. And I'm always conscious when I go and visit these entities, and you're sitting there with people who are always awesome, and there's a little bit in the back of my head which is like, why are you doing this? You could be probably making 2 or 3 times as much money. But I think for a lot of people, they really want to make a difference in the world. They want to do something that has impact. Milford says, in 2017, there was a server in France called Pirate something in the open web. It did exactly what HTTP does, except it spat out passwords to email queries in plain text. Instantly not good. There's been a lot of these. There's been WeLeak Info, Leaked Source, Leak Base. Well, I've got the word leak in them, oddly enough. Also, none of them exist anymore because apparently trading in stolen identity data isn't really good for your freedom. All right, moving on the list here. I want to start to wrap this up soon. What else are we doing? Oh, that was bust cache we were just talking about. Perf improvements on breach load. So this is one of our painful things at the moment. I'll give you the stats on this. Table storage, for all of its various faults, and the fact that we no longer actually use it, it was fast to load data. Fast compared to inserting into SQL Server. So in very simple terms, there's really only 3 tables that we need to insert data into in SQL Server when we load a data breach. One is a domain table. So remember, a data breach is just email addresses and the fact that they've appeared in a breach. An email address consists of 2 parts. It's the domain and the alias. We have a table of just domains, in part because this makes it easier for us to do domain searches. So we need to, let's say we've got I'm going to use this as an example. We've got a corpus here of 1.4 million email addresses. That was the size of the last data breach I loaded, Stalker Online. 1.4 email addresses. We need to get the domains out of that. There were about 14,000 domains in that list of 1.4 million email addresses. Of those 14,000 domains, we need to make sure that we have each one of those in the table already. A bunch of them will be there already. Some of them will be new. So we need to insert where not exists, effectively. When I loaded this data breach the other day, that took 25 seconds. I'm okay with that. 1.4 million records, 25 seconds. Now we then go through and we do a little bit of optimization, but the thing that starts to hurt us is we now need to look at the table of email addresses. So email addresses have effectively a foreign key to the domain. We don't enforce that constraint because that makes it really, really nasty in terms of the overhead of inserting into. But we've effectively got an ID that links back to the domain table, and we've got an alias and a few other attributes. It took 19 minutes and 39 seconds to insert any new email addresses that didn't already exist into there with the correct domain ID. That hurts. And that's at a fairly sizable SQL hyperscale instance as well. That's 1.4 million. Internet Archive the other day was 31 million. Now you start to take hours and hours. What happens when it's 300 million? You're starting to take more than a day for a query to run. So this is hurting us. The last thing we need to do, as I said, 3 tables: the domain table, the email address table. The last table is the mapping of the email address to the breach. So inserting into that table took 1 minute and 28 seconds. I'm pretty okay with that. I'm pretty okay with that in terms of a total duration, but it was only 1.4 million record breach as well. But regardless, we've got a total elapsed time here of probably about 25 minutes, and about 20 minutes of it is just inserting into that table. So we need to try and figure out how to make those inserts way faster without compromising on the indexes that then make it fast to read. So this is the trade-off there. Jay just came in, so I may have missed it. Did you get hold of the Earth 2 security people? Yes, I have hold of Earth 2 security people. There is some back and forth. Let's say that, but yes, I do have hold of people. Wayne says, have you wrote up on your reasons for switching from Azure to SQL? No, and I should. I really should. But a lot of it's everything from being able to restore the data. There's no restore. There's just literally no backup and restore model for table storage. There's certainly no point-in-time restore. The other day I did a point-in-time restore. Why did I do it? There was a reason. I thought I'd screwed something up, but it took about an hour and a half. So I can restore the entire Have I Been Pwned database at a point in time, and it takes about an hour and a half now with SQL Server. Ad hoc queries. Even things like we have retired 2 data breaches, and retiring a data breach means deleting the data out of it. There's a whole other story about why. Doing that against table storage is a nightmare. Doing it against SQL is one query. And yeah, maybe it'll take a while to run, but it's one query. So suddenly we've got all of this queryability and all of this management capability. This is before we even look at, say, what if we want to start replicating it, geo-replicating it? Well, we can do that with SQL Server. We can't do it with table storage. We could have done some of this with Cosmos, but then we'd miss other things that you get out of a relational database. And the fact that we now have serverless hyperscale where you can have database as a service that you just wind the knob up and down. The biggest challenge for us is trying to get the right scale, because we've got this model where we flush cache, and if we flush cache at the busiest period of the day, the scale we need is up here. But then if let's say we go 5 days without loading a data breach, almost every single query is then returned from Cloudflare Edge. So we really need just about no database. But then if we load another breach, then we flush cache, and now we need all the database again. So we're just trying to find the best ways to make sure we have enough headroom without overdoing it on the cost side of things. Trade shares is interesting here. Keep the site snappy. Yeah, and look, it should be a lot snappier now, particularly the further away we get from a new data breach having been loaded, because there's more data sitting there in Cloudflare, which is great, more cached. Rex, it's been a while since I really, with DBs, messed with DBs, did stuff with DBs. But if I recall, turning off indexing on bulk updates and switching back on afterwards was something we did decades ago, though. Yeah, the problem is that we don't, it depends on whether we're disabling it or deleting it, but when the table gets that large, creating indexes is also really, really expensive in terms of time. And you want the data to be searchable as soon as it's loaded as well, because if we put out an announcement and go, hey, such and such a data breach is now loaded, and someone searches for their email address and it's not there because it's not in the index, that's not good either. We do have really good support from Microsoft. So I feel like Stefan, he's not here, so I'll talk about him. I feel like he is really enjoying getting down into the weeds of all this performance tuning, which is great because we need that. And he, in his MVP capacity as well, has really good access to good people in Microsoft to help us tune this. So we've got, I think that the biggest gains for us are probably less what you see and more what we see on our bottom line. So I think we can keep that snappiness that Tradie Trev just mentioned and reduce our costs and hopefully increase the efficiency of our loads as well. Milford says, is there an up-to-the-minute patching system for SQL injection attacks? Well, we just don't write code that's vulnerable to SQL injections. So, there's that. And then it's just behind Cloudflare, which will identify a lot of that, even if people did try it anyway. So I'm not too worried about that. What else is in here? As Joel says, about index recreation is the problem. Binderbound. Maybe new records can be inserted in a copy without index, then recreate index and swap the DBs. Yeah, this is starting to get beyond the area that I know well into areas that Stefan is doing very well at. And when it gets beyond him, then we've literally got the people in the SQL Server team and Microsoft helping us, which is great. So at least I'm confident we have the absolute best people that we can talk to about this. Wayne says, have you ever done an update on running costs? Or do you not want to discuss publicly? Look, it varies massively. And the reason it varies massively is because, let's say this weekend, we do want to make an index change. I'm going to scale that database all the way up to, turn up to 11. And that is then costing us quite a bit while that runs. What I would say is, on average, it's single-digit thousands per month. The database level that we're running at the moment, I think, is about 100 Aussie dollars a day, which is about $3,000 a month. And I think that's too high. I think that will be able to come down. But again, offsetting that, when big domain users, for example, now have to pay for it, we can cover that cost. But we're sort of stuck between this rock and a hard place, where if we don't have things like SQL Server where we can actually do backups and point in time and restore, if we didn't have that, we could keep that cost down. But then what's the resiliency of the platform going to be like? Marek says, yeah, we could afford the wait time to end. Yeah, we don't want the wait time, though. I want everything, damn it. Jay says he's back on Earth too. I've heard a few E2 users got spammed on their private emails, so I guess the data is out there. Yeah, stay tuned on that. There'll be more on that. Milford says, that's it. I'm putting my entire life behind Cloudflare. The study to keeping up ratio per security felt. Yeah, Cloudflare is helpful. Tradie Trev says, I feel bad paying $30 for a domain. Well, look, again, I was saying earlier on, I think before you joined, mate, that it's ridiculous for a technology business in general, particularly Have I Been Pwned, how small we can keep our overheads as a proportion of our revenue compared to businesses where, for example, tradies, have to buy tools and equipment and labor and all the rest of it. So like we're fine. This isn't a problem, but I still want to keep those costs obviously as low as possible. All right, let's look at the last stuff before I wrap this up. Two more things. Now, number one, I put this in here because someone raised it the other day. Voluntary product accessibility template. So we had a request for a VPAT, which I had not heard of before. This is from a school in the US. They said it's mandatory their vendors have one. First time we've ever heard that, but it's probably not a bad idea. Also probably something to be done as part of the UX redesign, so I'm capturing it here just for future reference. Now, I've put a Wikipedia link in here so that I can actually look at what it means later on. I'll drop that in the chat as well in case anyone is interested in what a VPAT is. As we go and we do this redesign work, that's something that I think does actually make a bit of sense to have. What did I put in there? I just put the Dropbox link in there. Sorry, folks, I copied the wrong thing. If you're just joining now and you're clicking that Dropbox link and you're like, what a crap logo that is. Yeah, that's what we got from Fiverr. So, yeah. Okay, there's the right link. So let's give that one a go. So a voluntary product assessment template is a template containing information regarding how an information and communications technology product or services conforms with Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Sounds boring as hell, but it's probably really important to people that do have accessibility needs. So if we've got to pick this up and go through it again in terms of the redesign of the website, that seems reasonable. Aaron B&B says, I'm an expert on VPATs. It's a statement of your current accessibility, typically done by a third party. That might be a situation where we just got to look at what's involved in getting that done. Last thing here, very, very last thing on the list, and then we're going to wrap it up because it's been going over an hour now. Consider processing stealer logs. It's going to take much longer to explain than what I'd planned. So stealer logs are the result of malware running on machines, capturing usernames and passwords entered into websites. So it's effectively three values in each row. The website URL, Netflix/login, whatever. The username used, usually an email address, and a password. I've loaded a bunch of stealer logs into Have I Been Pwned before where there's been large corpuses available from Telegram. A lot of other people have popped up and sent smaller corpuses of stealer logs. They're a bit icky to deal with insofar as they are important because they are genuine credentials captured from victims across a whole range of websites through no fault of the website, but because the victim's been compromised. But if you're not able to tell the victim the website or the password, it does make it harder for them to deal with. You're basically left with going, you've probably got malware on your machine, and they're like, oh no, what do I do next? It's not like a data breach where it's like, this website lost your data, and here is the information. Well, here's the metadata describing what was exposed. You can always go and talk to them, get your real data. The other thing that is actually really, really valuable in stealer logs that would be really useful is, let's say you've got 100 people impacted by a stealer log. And for every one of those 100 people, you've got each of the websites they've gone to and the email address and the passwords entered. And one of those websites is a hardware store. Just picking an example because it's a tape measure on my desk. It's a hardware store. And you've got this hardware store that's got a dozen different people that has got the hardware store's URL and then their email address and password. Now that hardware store is going to see attackers logging into their service, getting the email address and the password right first go. Now, I know this because on multiple occasions after a previously loaded stealer logs, I've had the hardware store reach out and go, hey, look, we've seen our customers suffering account takeover attacks. We've just checked a few of their email addresses on Have I Been Pwned, and each of them are in this Telegram log. Can you help us out? And for one of them in particular, it was somewhere close to home, so I felt a little bit more comfortable doing this. They said, could you give us a list of the email addresses that are against our, we'll say, hardware store? And I sort of went, this is in the steel logs. Oh, well, you're asking me to give you someone else's email addresses, but I'm pretty confident the steel logs are accurate, which means that these are actually your customers because their email addresses are sitting there next to your URL. And effectively, we got to the point where I felt comfortable enough that these were actually customers of the hardware store. So I didn't give them the passwords, but I gave them the email addresses. They looked at their logs and they went, yep, these are exactly the people where we've seen account takeover attacks happening. Long story short, the value of Stealer logs is not just to the individuals that are in the Stealer logs, but it's also of value to the organizations who have customers in the Stealer logs. Because that hardware store could have gone through and immediately forced password reset on everyone. They'd then have to email their customers and they'd have to explain Stealer logs and all that. That's not my problem, that's their problem. There is value there for that organization and benefit to the customers as well. And ultimately, it's probably a good way to start rounding the whole thing out. This is the goal of the project. How do we take data from usually criminal acts and do something useful with it that makes the world better and makes it better not just for the individuals, but in the case of Stealer logs, the websites they're using, and hopefully even makes it better for the organizations that have themselves had data breaches. I'd much rather those organizations know about data breaches as soon as possible, inform customers, and then take measures to secure their system and also help their customers secure themselves. That's the goal. And that's what all of our backlog stuff here largely has to do. Just as I said that, I remembered we've got the challenge coin objective in there, which doesn't really do any of that, but it's good fun. All right, folks, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks for listening. If you find this useful, we'll do more of these in the future. I will pre-plan this in advance to do one with Stefan as well, where we get more into the weeds. We probably need to try and do this with both of us on video, I think. So we'll try and make that happen. See you, everyone.